All right, so welcome everybody. We're gonna go ahead and do our second class discussion group about the mind. And welcome to this second um, topic, which is on the conventional aspects of the mind, conventional mind. So, as always, we're going to set our minds in the right way so that we can utilize all of the efforts that we put forth. Um, and first of all, just noticing what our mind is doing. So if we just focus our attention on the breath for 3 breaths, completely aware of each of the inhalations and exhalations. And at the end of that 3rd breath, continuing but shifting that awareness to the quality of the mind, paying attention to the breath. And sometimes we can actually see that as a reflection in the body, how tense or relaxed we are, the places where the breath catches, the smoothness of the breath, where we have a rough spot, where it changes between one quality and another. So if our mind is focused on the breathing, but we're looking for the quality of the mind, paying attention to it, how distracted are we? How easy is it to focus and keep on that object? So, having had some experience of our mind, we want to set our intention and then immediately collect some merit by doing our prayers, and then we'll have our discussion. So, why are we having this discussion? Why have we come together via all this electronic magnificence in order to talk about the mind? What is the outcome that we hope? and then expanding that into as vast an outcome. How much benefit can we have from this? An infinite, countless number of ways in which we can benefit others and ourselves. Um, so if there are infinite others and we benefit them just even a little bit, it's an infinite amount. If we can benefit them more than just a little bit, it's an even more infinite amount. So that's the vastness. And then also the profundity, the most profound way in which we are going to develop our minds is looking for that unmistaken view of the reality, so that we have absolutely no fault in our view of how things actually exist. Then there's no suffering, because there's no way in which there's a difference between what we're experiencing and the way things are. So then that profound view becomes as deep and true as possible. And with that, we develop this mind of bodhicitta, the mind wishing to become fully enlightened in order to benefit others, in order to develop that mind as vast and profound as possible. So this isn't just some superimposed idea, it's something we're actually doing from the inside out, from where we are, all the way to enlightenment, all the way to omniscience, to perfect capacity, to perfect understanding, perfect power, perfect skillful means, ability, ways to know things and ways to emanate things, ways to manifest things. So let's praise the Buddha. And I'm going to do a little trick. I hope I don't disappear from you, but if I do, you can read the prayer to yourself. Hold on while I do this. All right. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed,
teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Bururana Mandalakam Niryatayam. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chudang sogi choknam la jang chu bardu dagni kyap suchi dagi chunyen gi pesonam hi drola penchu sangye druparsho. Sangye chodam sogi chokdam la jang chu bardu dagni kyap suchi dagi chunyen gi pesonam hi drola penchir sangye druparsho. So, how is everybody this evening? I am gonna try to pull up my screen in just a minute, but my computer is being uncooperative. So we have Paymane and Jana. I thought I saw Sarah. Yes, there's Sarah. Okay, good. And Adriana, if I got your name right. Okay. There we go. Good.
It's Adrian.
Most of you were here last time, and we started with just a general discussion about the mind. We talked about our perception of our mind, and at the end we came to some interesting kinds of discussion points, and we had to stop there. I wrote them down, and I've been diligently trying to get them back in front of me, and I have these other obstacles coming up here. There we go. Which I hope I'm getting taken care of one by one here. So I'm going to share my screen and find where we left off. Oh, I can't share unless John lets me. So, we talked about what we already know about the mind, that the mind is not the brain, that we have aggregates, these 5 aggregates, which are any way we can try to figure out to talk about ourself. It can be put into these 5 aggregates, these collections of embodiments and experience that we have as a self, and that are in traditional Indian philosophy is 5 different things: form, feeling, discrimination, what's called compositional factors, which are sort of like volitional factors, emotional factors, and things like that, mental states, mental factors, and then consciousness itself. So these five, 4 of them are mental, 1 of them is physical. So out of the 5 aggregates, we've got 4 mental elements, and 1 of those is consciousness. So the difference between consciousness and mental factors, it's sort of like consciousness is the awareness, the experience of something that we have in our inner experience, and we then have that, some of that experience comes through our body and some of it comes through a mental sense faculty. And then there's also the direct yogic perception, which is sort of outside of that sensory, a little bit beyond the sensory. But oh good, John is back, and so maybe he can help me share my screen. You've disabled people sharing their screens, so can't do that. So what we came to last time was how the mind is like a stream, right? Both particle and wave-like in its presentation. And most often, somebody said, most often, this has to be taken as a mind on faith. So there's this question that we left off with, which was that the mind is sort of the mind stream, right? Where somebody likened it to a river or a stream where particles of water are bumping into each other. So it appears they're moving, but they're really just bumping into each other. And that's creating a stream-like effect. So that the mind is sort of like that, having things bump into it, but it's a stream of consciousness. So that's where we left off, was this presentation of the mind sort of like a stream, and this idea of there's some faith involved in understanding what the mind is. That was your idea, not that you as a collective. So let's see if this will work. Yes, it's going to work. Here it comes. So this mind stream, we can look at it as the conventional mind. So we want to look at what do we actually experience. So are you seeing my, yeah, there it goes. What do we actually experience as a mind stream? Conventional itself is something to look at. What does it mean, ultimate and conventional? Because next week we're going to look at the ultimate mind. This week we're looking at the conventional mind. What does conventional mean? So conventional has 3 meanings in Tibetan philosophy or Indian philosophy. One is this worldly or mundane, conventional reality that we live in, which is, in the dictionary, it says based on or in accordance with what is generally done or believed. So generally held to be acceptable. That's what conventional means in a conventionally worldly sense through the dictionary. Then in terms of the Buddhist kind of philosophical realm, worldly is the experience of ordinary beings. So you and I are ordinary, we're worldly, we're experiencing the world rather than experiencing the supermundane or the ultimate reality of the Arya, with beings who are able to do that in meditation first and then work their way up through different levels so that they can experience ultimate reality as a Buddha would at the very top of that experience. So that's one definition of conventional, this worldly sense of the ordinary. And then there's the relative sense. So conventional reality has this way of being not ultimate because it is relative, which means that things are dependently arising. And that side of seeing things as how we experience them in an interdependent way as relative. So they are always relative to something else. When it's dependently arisen, there's nothing that's like totally independent, separate. It's always in relation to something else. So this is that conventional reality that's relative. And you can get this whole thing, Adriana, you can get them, you don't have to take pictures of them. You will get the whole slideshow, so don't worry. And then there's a third way in which we use conventional in philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, which is covering the ultimate nature of something. The true nature, the ultimate nature, is hidden by this covering, which is the appearance of things. So we experience things as independent, right? That phone is not of you. You wouldn't say that's part of your actual self. It's something that's outside of yourself. And that appearance of being separate is a covering of the truth. We're not saying that you are the cell phone, right? But we are saying that there is a subtler way of being than the appearance of us being completely independent. When we appear to be truly existent, to be self-sufficient, to be substantial, to be independent, permanent, all these words that you've heard in the Buddhist philosophical context are pointing to this way in which the conventional truth is a truth covering the ultimate truth. So that's in Madhyamaka especially, covering is the most. We should be thinking about this definition of conventional when we're talking about Buddhist philosophy, particularly Madhyamaka. That's what I've been hearing lately from my teachers, particularly George Chernoff on Saturday morning. So, so 3 ways in looking at what conventional means: worldly, relative, and covering. I believe I've got those. But all of this is the inner experience we're having. So our outer experience, our gross experience, our worldly experience, our relative experience, our covering experience is that of an interaction with the world on the outer side and on the inner side as well. So our outer experience is going to be that goes through our form, and the inner experience is going to be the mental realm that we're experiencing things in. Our inner experiences include things like feelings, sense consciousness, cognitions that remember previous experiences, cognitions that consider reasons. So just today, I was telling John earlier, I finally got into the book that His Holiness directed a series of geshe, a series of books to be made by geshes and Westerners together, working together. And I watched some of this process happening when I was in Dharamsala a few years back. One of my friends was on this committee and talking with the geshes and arguing over all of these definitions, what to put in and what to take out, and how to compile a presentation of the mind. So there's the nature of the mind chapter in the mind volume of this series is where I'm taking a lot of this material this evening. So inner experiences, whether we think that the mind is material or immaterial, it's these inner experiences that make up the mind. The feelings, sense consciousnesses, cognitions that remember previous experiences, and cognitions that consider reason. And what we call consciousness is known to exist based on experience. So it does not necessarily need to be proved through reasoning. Nevertheless, there are many types of subtle mental states that must be proved through reasoning. So this kind of relates to what we were talking about in terms of taking what the mind actually is on faith. Here it is. We have an experience of our mind all the time. We have feelings, we have sense consciousnesses. We're seeing so much more than we even recognize. We're hearing so much more than we recognize. We're feeling, tasting, smelling, touching. What's the other one? I'm missing one. Anyway, hearing, sight, smell. All of those sense organized. Uh-oh. Have I come back yet? Can you hear me? Okay. So all of our experiences, whether they're through our senses or not, we are experiencing on this mental level. We're having this inner experience, but that's a gross experience. And then what that mind actually is, are we taking that on faith? They're saying that in terms of experience is something we don't have to prove. We experience what we experience. We don't have to we don't have to say we have to prove that we experience something. No, I'm experiencing this now, right? I'm seeing this color now. I'm seeing the pink of my jacket right now. That's an experience. I don't have to prove that I'm seeing this. I am seeing this right now. Whether it's correct or not, I might need to prove through reasoning. If I wanted to go into the subtler states of mind, I might need to go through some reasoning to understand those. You may disagree with this statement. I can see it both ways. I can see how there's still some faith in understanding what the mind is. So this hasn't disproved that it hasn't come to a conclusion in my mind based on this one quote, right? So let's see. We also talked a lot last week about the difference between the brain and the mind, the consciousness and physical things, and looking at that interrelationship. So consciousness and physical things, there's a definite difference about them in Buddhist philosophy. And this difference really hinges on the definition of what a physical thing is and the definition of what a mind is. So a physical thing is obstructive. A mental consciousness, awareness, and we're going to talk about those terms a little bit, is established as clear and aware in nature. So physical things are obstructive in nature, and consciousness is clear and aware in nature. Consciousness is merely experiential in nature, and consciousness is capable of knowing objects. So in the sutras, it is telling us that it's difficult, the mind is difficult to catch a hold of. So in that sense, we might have to take some of it on faith because it's so hard to actually catch a hold of our mind and analyze it. The mind is difficult to catch hold of, being intangible, not something we can touch. We can't grab a hold of it and use a knife to dissect it. It is weightless. Being intangible, it is weightless. Like a firebrand spinning around, it does not rest. Like the constantly moving waves of the ocean, it is unstable. Like the forest fire, it ignites all deeds of body and speech. Like a great river, the mind forcefully draws along a vast number of internal movements of awareness and so forth. I just like the poetry of that. I mean, all these analogies of, you know, being like an ocean, moving, the constantly moving waves of an ocean, being unstable, being like a forest fire, igniting all of what we do in our body and our speech. And like a great river, forcefully drawing a vast number of internal movements. Some really fabulous ways to think about the mind. So in general, the mind accomplishing the goals that living beings desire. In general, the mind is difficult to identify. And in general, the mind can be trained or tamed. The Buddha's main teaching is to do no harm and to train or tame one's mind. Right? That's what we practice for. We practice to train our mind. We do lojong. We do all of our virtuous, ethical structure is to train our mind. To tame. All right, I've talked a bit. I could keep going. Blah, 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 blah. Anybody want to jump in and discuss any of these points so far? Anything that I've just been ignoring and you want to jump in? Welcome, Laura. Yes, go ahead, Adriana.
So in general, so the brain is what trains the mind. Yes.
Did you want to talk, Adriana, or no?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Sorry. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
We're unmuted, but we're not.
John, oh, there you are, you're unmuted.
We're
Okay.
unmuted.
Can you hear me? Okay. So is the brain what is training the mind? I mean, we have to use our brains to train the mind.
I apologize. I had turned my speaker off. I didn't hear anything that you said. Now I
Okay.
can.
Okay. So, I mean, the only thing that I can understand about a part of this is that our brain is what trains the mind. Which, I mean, the mind is this intangible thing that we're having faith in, that it even exists. But we have to use our brains to train ourselves and train the mind. Yes or no?
Well, I think you could say that we use our minds to train our mind. Why would you say, I
Okay.
don't know what you're referring to say your brains must train your mind. So you'll have to explain to me what you think more for me to understand.
Okay. I'm not sure. I guess I'm trying to understand. I know that the brain is a physical entity, you know, I know that, and that the mind may not be. It's this intangible thing that, you know, we can't actually touch. And so, I mean, we're using our thoughts to train the mind, or we're using our, which come from the brain. Am I just really off here?
No, you have I mean, I think a lot of people share your view of share your view of how the mind and brain are connected, right? That they're pretty much the same thing. That the physical brain is governing the mind.
I guess that's the conventional understanding, you know.
But
Yeah.
and it's true they have an interrelationship, right?
Mhm.
It's true that if if our brain and the chemicals in the brain go to an extreme, we would see that in our mind, right? Our minds would change. Our experience, our inner experience would change based on the, and John, we're seeing your, whatever you're scrolling through, sort of. So it's true that that will influence our brains, our bodies, our experience of our senses. That's all going to influence our mind, right? That's all going to become part of our sensory experience and our mental experience. But the mind itself, when we get into Buddhist philosophy, is not the brain, and it's not governed by the brain. It's the other way around, really. That forest fire igniting all the deeds of our body and speech, it's behind the loudness of those outer thoughts that we associate with our mind. Okay, so it's really not identified with what's called adventitious things that come and go, right? We think of our mind as the pleasant and unpleasant and neutral experiences that we have. But that's not the whole of the mind in Buddhist philosophy. Okay? So we can have a pleasant thought, or we can see a pleasant color, or a piece of art, pleasant visual form, and we'll have that experience of pleasantness. But it's a tamed mind that's the source of all the happiness and suffering. It's whether our mind is tamed or not, whether we really experience that as happiness or suffering. So you can see this when you're really happy and somebody pinches you or you stub your toe, right? Walking around happy and you stub your toe and you're like, oh, that was nothing. It was just a little stuff. But if you're already upset and you stub your toe, it's like the end of the world, and you just are full of that experience of how horrible that stubbing of your toe was. But you could have stubbed it just as hard and been happy and to start with, and wouldn't have experienced it to the suffering of it that way. Right?
Right. Okay.
So if our mind is tamed and we're doing things that are making us happy, not just in a very temporary way, but in a longer term way, and our mind, based on that functioning of our mind, is happy, has that source of happiness coming from it, that tamed mind is the highest excellence, right? This is where we get this long-term happiness from, is taming our mind. And it's on the basis of a tamed mind that happiness arises, true happiness.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. It's very good to have questions. Anybody else? Does anybody else have something they want? Sarah? Yeah.
I didn't get that adjective. The sound on my computer is not very good. And you said, what kind of mind? It sounded like you said, oh, the tamed mind. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
The tamed mind is the source of our happiness.
Yeah.
Okay, because the mind is I used to belong to the Edgar Casey group, and they were always fond of saying the mind is the builder.
Yes.
The mind is the builder of mood, and mood is the source of action. All right, I got it now. Thank you.
So we've been saying mind, we've been saying consciousness a bit, we've been saying experience, but I wanted to go into, when we're talking about the conventional mind, so we talked about conventions, so let's talk about the words around mind a little bit more. So in Tibet, I can find these 4 words that mean different in different contexts. They mean mind. They mean sem, lo, rigpa, shepa. And then in Sanskrit, I've just run across these 3: buddhi, jhana, and samvita. Oops. So sem means mind, and you can see this in the phrases semchin tamche, all sentient beings, semge, which is when you're talking about the developing the mind of awakening. Semge is used. Lo is mind or awareness, and lorik is our types of mind, and lojang is our mind training. So we see those. Rigpa, knowing, consciousness, knower, cognizer. Selwa rigpa, the clear, clear and knowing. Selwa rigpa. Lorig, again, this is, well, rig is also type. So shepa, consciousness, sherab. So wisdom also, sherab. But shepa, as part of this word wisdom, sherab, rab is rabjung. I think it's like excellent mind, excellent consciousness. So we have wisdom. So these are some of the words that you'll hear in Tibetan. And of course, bodhi means awakened mind, but buddhi is was the Sanskrit, and I don't know how to put those 2 together, the Tibetan and the Sanskrit, yet. I didn't have enough time to do that research, but we want to look at some of the definitions of mind. So you'll see it as clear and knowing, luminous and aware, or clear and aware, or luminous and knowing. You'll see mind as an ability to reflect objects, and sometimes there'll be a way of talking about it as clarity and luminosity. So we're going to look at these in more detail. So here we have cognition, awareness, and consciousness. I think that's lo, sem, and rig. So these are the three of those, the 3 Sanskrit terms for sure, and 3 of the 4 Tibetan terms: cognition, consciousness, awareness. These are all inner experiences, happen on the mental sphere. They don't happen in the physical sphere. We don't associate anything in the physical sphere with cognition. A stone is usually not embedded with an awareness. We don't, unless we're in a certain cultural worldview. In our cultural worldview, awareness and physical matter are not associated with each other, in terms of a stone does not have awareness like we do, or consciousness, or cognition. There's no thinking going on inside the stone. But our consciousness, our cognition, our awareness is clear and aware. So let's look at what those 2 things really mean. So clear, another way of saying clear is luminous, or luminous clarity. And this is the essential nature of mind, whereas the awareness is the functional nature of mind. So this is the essential nature of mind, that in essence, our mind is clear. It is non-obstructive. There's no obstruction to consciousness. It's not material. So back to the definition of what a physical object is. A physical object is obstructive, and a mental object is non-obstructive. So consciousness is beyond the nature of material. Oops, sorry. Beyond the nature of matter, free of obstructivity, free of obstruction. Are there any questions rising up just from that? Our essential nature of mind is without obstruction. I don't know about you, but I feel quite obstructed in my mind. I don't remember things. I haven't got, a good understanding. Like, I don't even understand what my daughter would really like, pink or purple. Like how obstructive. I'm very obstructed, right? And yet underneath of that, the nature of my mind, if I'm taking this on faith or if I'm taking it on reason, in either case, the nature, what this is presenting is that the nature of mind is without obstruction. That any internal or external object can appear in consciousness. Any internal or external object whatsoever can appear in the consciousness. So I've never seen a certain kind of frog, right? But apparently any external object whatsoever can appear in consciousness. Any internal. I've never had murderous rage. It doesn't mean that it's always there, right? It doesn't mean that any object whatsoever is always appearing in consciousness. It just means that consciousness is without obstruction, and therefore it can reflect any object, whether it's external or internal. Without any limit, really, whatsoever. Okay, no questions, no discussion, or? The essential nature of consciousness is not contaminated by the stains of mental afflictions. Okay,
Hello.
go for it.
So what I just heard was interesting. When you said the essential nature of mind reflects, that word reflects kind of, that rang a bell for me now, finally, about what the mind is, that it reflects anything external or internal. And in my, what I've previously thought about the mind is that it collects anything external or internal that I am aware of. And what you're saying is that it's so essential, it's so untainted, it simply reflects, it's completely clean of any of my, is that what, am I getting that right?
I think
Because if
what,
it collects everything, then it's going to absorb all of my, experiences, but it doesn't do that. It reflects. That's
I think-
interesting.
I think what you're saying is clarified when we get to the 7 types of mind.
Okay.
Because when we talk about remembering things, right? That's sort of like what you're talking about, collecting things.
Okay.
If I have an experience and I collect that experience, where do I keep it? I keep it in my memory,
Mhm. That's
right? So
Mhm.
in that way, the mind does collect.
okay.
But when we're talking about the nature of the mind itself, that that general mind, that mind that is not specifically remembering, the minds that are experiencing, right? When we're having an experience, whether it's mental or physical, we're reflecting. We may be reflecting on that memory, or we may be reflecting an object. But how the mind does that is part of the study of the mind in Buddhist philosophy. How the mind reflects and how it remembers, how it is a sensory consciousness, and how a direct perception of something, how it's a direct perception or an inference, how it's um, an experience, directly through the senses, or how it's a reasoning, mental process that we get to. But in any case, what the mind is doing is reflecting an external or an internal object. So an external object would be a physical object, and an internal object would be a mental object. Not
Yes.
talking about the inside of our body, that would still be an external object, because that would be,
Yes. Yeah.
a physical thing. So it's drawing the line of internal at the border of the mental from the physical. So then the essential nature of consciousness is not contaminated by the stains of mental afflictions. So this is where my murderous rage, right, doesn't actually touch the mind.
Mhm.
It doesn't touch the nature of the mind. The essential nature of the consciousness is clear and knowing. It's clear and aware. And that nature doesn't get contaminated even by those extremes of mental afflictions,
Okay.
attachment, and all the poisonous things that we do with our emotional states. It doesn't contaminate the nature of the mind.
Okay.
It contaminates our speech, it contaminates our action, it contaminates and creates suffering and creates all the horrible consequences of all the things that we do. And those go on beyond what we usually think about. Those contaminations happen by those afflictive states, but the actual nature of the mind stays clear and knowing. It's not changed. In that way, it's almost like an ultimate nature that we're talking about here. Even though we're talking about conventional nature of mind, because we go to the point of saying it's unchanging, in my mind, we've crossed into almost ultimate nature. We're starting on some kind of ultimate nature of the mind, very essential nature. The core of our mind is untouched by these external factors or even our mental constructs that we superimpose on reality. In that way, it's we're edging into the ultimate nature of the mind.
Thank you. It's so interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. So any questions about this clarity aspect? So these are the two. Remember, we're looking at the definition of mind being clear and aware. We're just looking at the clarity aspect right now. And sometimes people use these words together, luminous clarity. And this luminous clarity is again directing towards this last point about the essential nature of consciousness as it is uncontaminated by the stains of mental afflictions, unchanged. So this is where that luminous clarity comes out, where we're putting luminosity, clarity together.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
So my question is, who has this luminous clarity? Who has this? Do we all have it maybe once in a while? Is it visible to any of us on this plane? Does the Dalai Lama have it?
So this nature of mind, what it's saying is, okay, so in Buddhist philosophy, every living being has a mind. Every sentient being has a mind. And every sentient being's mind is clear and aware. An
But
ant,
without
an
negativity.
ant has this, a dolphin has this, a chimpanzee has this, and every human has this.
But we are full of negativity and defilements. That's why we're Buddhists, because we recognize this. So I'm just wondering, what does this look like in real life? Does anybody have this on this plane?
We all have this.
But we're not,
Whether or not we're aware of it or not is the question.
the what?
Whether or not we access it, whether we're aware of our own essential nature of consciousness. And this is still the conventional side of it, right?
Yeah.
So, Mahamudra, Dzogchen, all of these practices that are about the essential nature of consciousness, this is the conventional side of that practice. Those practices are directly trying to become aware of the essential nature of consciousness and to see it. And this is where maybe it takes more reasoning, or it takes a certain type of trained mind to be able to filter out all of the noise of those afflictions that just pile on each other, and we are so engaged in, and then we add more by watching movies and TV and listening to the news. But what we're doing when we meditate and we go quieter and quieter and quieter is we're finding a different awareness level is available to our
So that's what I was thinking. Maybe the way for us to access is through really intensive meditation. I wonder if those people that meditate for 4 and 5 years, at a go, I wonder if they get there.
Well, and even if you don't have the opportunity to do 3 or 4 or 5 years of meditation in a row, if you are trained, you can, you can have other ways in, I think, but it depends on your karma and depends on your, the teacher that you have might be expert at pointing those out to you. But here is the theory that mind is never apart from us, right? Again, we've got our self. We've got 5 aggregates that make up this self. One of those is consciousness. Consciousness is what we're looking at here as clear and aware. And that consciousness, in essence, is without the stains of the mental afflictions. So we are not separated from this. It's like we've covered it. Right? So you go into the Sufis and all the veils, or you go into this conventional covering that we do in philosophy, and we get totally we get totally distracted from the true nature that we have in our mind. So
It's we're distracted by samsara, in essence, right?
we are engaged in that realm, right? We interact on that conventional layer of reality all the time. That's where we live. Right? We live in the conventional world. We're ordinary beings. We're not Aryas with direct perception of emptiness. We're not Aryas with the direct perception of the true nature of mind. No. We
I
are
think
we
Thank you.
are ordinary beings. So our awareness, so if that's the essential nature, is this clear and uncontaminated, unobstructed nature of the mind, the awareness side is the function of the mind. And this is part of the definition of mind. So that the function, this awareness, illuminates objects, cognizes its object, apprehends its object. This is what it's doing, right? It's illuminating, it's cognizing, it's apprehending, it's reflexive awareness. It's having an awareness of itself by virtue of being existent. So in the way that it exists. So it's okay. So now we are getting into how do we actually see reality, right? In order to talk about these things in any detail or with any small resemblance to precision, right? We've got the function of the mind is its awareness, and depending on what school of philosophy we're talking from, we talk about it in a little bit different ways. I didn't go into all of that detail because, for one thing, I'd have to study it a little bit longer than I had this week. And for another, it's too much. The function of the mind is being aware of something, of illuminating something, of cognizing something, of apprehending, of holding, collecting, like Adriana was saying, a little bit, right? Holding on to something, collecting, apprehending, cognizing. So this is all on the mental plane. So we imagine, as we are looking at the screen and you're seeing my hand come up the first time, you're seeing an object. That hand becomes an object. So what is your mind doing? It's understanding what that is. If I were to put up another object, you would look at it at first and you'd say, well, what is it? Right? What's your mind doing when you're doing that? Hope it's not too dirty. I think it's just a crumpled up tissue, but you might have thought, oh, she's got a flower in her hand, or your brain actually goes through a process of eliminating what it isn't. Well, first of all, it wasn't a cat. First of all, it wasn't a giraffe. First of all, it was definitely not an elephant, and then slowly you got to white object, maybe a flower, maybe a tissue, but I saw you kind of going for it. And what your mind did was you went to that object. Your mind went to the object. And that's what we do. We go to the object. We become the object. The mind actually, in a way, becomes the object and then has an awareness of itself. Is that on faith? Do you believe it? Does it make sense? Did you have to reason to get to that understanding? It's a lot to think about. But in some of what was being presented in this volume on the mind is that it's actually in a it's have the mind being aware is having the quality of reflexive awareness. It's having the quality of being self-aware, cognizing its own nature. As opposed to anything that's in the nature of matter. This computer does not cognize its own nature. My sleeping bag does not cognize its own nature. Those are physical things. Those physical things do not cognize their own nature. They don't have a mind. They don't have awareness. They don't have the ability to know objects. But knowing an object, what the mind is actually doing is knowing itself. In this view, it can't meet anything other than itself. Another way is to say it's not aware, it's not unaware. An awareness is not unaware. Oh, thanks for the, loop-de-loop through the grammar, right? Epistemology never seems helpful to me. It's just like playing with words and coming around to something that is obvious if you know grammar. That doesn't help, right? But at some point, hearing that the awareness is not unaware means it's not unaware of itself. Now, I have a little bit of a problem with this one. Because way back when I was being taught about the 12 links of dependent origination, right? 12 links of dependent origination. You've got consciousness, and you've got form, you've got the sense faculties, and then along comes an object. And then you have contact, right? And it's only when you have an object, an ability, a sense faculty, and a consciousness, only when you have all three of these, you have contact. You have to have a consciousness, a sense faculty, and an object to have that contact. Once you have that contact, you have an experience, you have a feeling that arises. Once you have that feeling, whether it's pleasant, neutral, or unpleasant, then you have the response to that. And that's where we all have our karma created, right? That's the beginning of craving, grasping. So first you have the feeling, the contact, and then you have desire arise, right? Whether it's desire for pleasant, continuing to be neutral, or the desire to be rid of the unpleasant. Something arises. And that experience comes from the feeling that arises. But then we grasp at it even more and reach for it. Then we go we go from craving to grasping, right? It's like the craving arises, but we didn't do anything about it yet. And as soon as we reach out our hand to grab it when we're a baby, we've gone to the grasping stage. So why do I have a problem with the last thing, the reflexive awareness? Because in order to have a consciousness of something, you actually have to have the object. So how is this reflexive? If you have to have the object in order to have the consciousness of the object, how is that reflexive? So the consciousness relies on the object, but somehow that object in the experience, I can only right now, the furthest reach of my understanding is that it's the experience stays in the mental sphere. The mind itself is knowing its own nature through the experience of the sense faculty and the object, contacting each other, arising as a feeling, and so on. What do you think? Sarah, are you trying to say something?
No,
Oh, okay. I'm just hearing clicking noises.
trying to think of something.
Oh, well,
I think it's too, Jamie.
anyway, that I'm just explaining how far I've gotten, and I don't know where you are yet. But that's how my mind pieces these things together right now. We can go on to one more place in the volume on the mind today. They said that sometimes there's three qualities of mind. There's the clear awareness and the empty. Those three ways of saying the mind is clear and aware and empty. So I wanted to unpack that. So as another way of describing the mind as empty, naturally empty of obstructive, anything obstructive, right? So back to what we were talking about in terms of the essential nature of the clarity of the mind, the luminous clarity. It's just kind of saying that a different way, that it's empty of obstruction. But it's also pointing at the emptiness of true existence. All right. So the mind is empty of true existence. All phenomena are empty of true existence, right? That's the Buddhist teaching. There's not a single phenomenon. So the mind itself also is empty of true existence. It's not inherently existence. It's not independent from all of the other things. It's a relative phenomena. It is not something that is ultimately, inherently, on its own, substantial, self-sufficient, independent, permanent. The mind is empty of all that. That makes sense, right? If it's clear and aware, it's got to be empty, right, Adriana?
Well, okay. So I'm hearing so many different things about the essential nature of mind, the essential nature that's clear. Is it not dependent on me? I mean, is it, if it is, and is it truly, if it's clear of obstruction, then that the essential nature is clear of obstruction, then it seems to me it would not even be dependent upon me, that it just exists. I mean, if it's empty of true existence, and yet, well, I'm trying to get to it. And I'm also hearing that the essential nature of mind is unchanging, when all I keep hearing from Buddhist philosophy is that nothing is unchanging, everything changes. So I'm a little confused.
I agree. I agree. The only thing I could point out is that empty of true existence means that it is dependent.
It is dependent?
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's empty of true existence, it's necessarily a dependent origination. It's not, it is dependent on other things. But then we start from the gross level, the tree is dependent on the soil. That's a gross level dependence. But then we're going to go a little bit deeper and we're going to say, okay, the tree is dependent on the forest. And then we're going to go a little deeper. The tree is dependent on the people that take care of the forest. And then we go, the tree is dependent on the child who's never seen it in the forest. Well, I mean, we can refine our dependence on how things are interrelated, right? We can go beyond the obvious, right? And what happens in Buddhist philosophy is we go into how the mind holds the view, like the view of reality, right? So if and we go very subtle into that, so that it gets all the way down to what's called merely labeled dependence on the merely labeled basis, right? And that is like because my mind is cognizing the tree as a tree, it's dependent on my mind. Or another way of seeing it is the karmic connections between myself and that tree. My being an existent being, because I exist as a being in this environment, I have had something to do with creating this environment through my karmic actions in the past. And collectively, we've done that because we can only experience things we've created the cause for.
Okay.
We don't experience a tree that we haven't created the cause to experience that tree. Even if that tree is there for someone else, we won't bump into it because we haven't created the karma. All right, so
Thank you.
that's like refining what that means, right? That's all refining what it means to be empty of true existence. But back to empty being like a label for the mind, just like awareness is aware and clear and aware, clear and knowing, luminous and knowing. Just like all of those are kind of descriptions or definitions of what the mind is, it could also be said to be empty. So the sense consciousnesses cannot arise without the causal basis, the physical sense organs. So now we're back to this relationship between mental and physical, right? A sense consciousness isn't the faculty. The faculty is, okay, so karmically, the 12 links give us this in a nice linear fashion, sort of. When we come into existence as a human being, our sense faculties are fixed, are developed, and the range of what they will experience is sort of established, not 100%, but normal, like there's a normal range in which we will experience things. But that's not our sense consciousness. Our sense consciousness is not the I faculty. It's the consciousness associated with that faculty. So so there's a physical form that we can see. That's a visual object. There's the sense faculty, and then there's the I consciousness. They all come together. But without that eye organ, there's no consciousness.
Which comes first, chicken or the egg?
And so that's just one type of of consciousness. Most other types of mental consciousness besides sense consciousnesses are drawn from some sense consciousness. So my inference that there is a fire from seeing smoke. So my sense consciousness has a direct perception of smoke, and then I can infer from that direct perception of smoke that there's a fire. So that's what it is, one example of most other types of mental consciousnesses besides sense consciousnesses have some relationship to having a sensory experience. So therefore are indirectly dependent on the physical sense faculties, the eye consciousness in this case. Another one that most of us probably haven't had an actual experience of, but we've heard about. We've heard about yogis flying.
What?
So in order to, have you ever heard of a yogi flying?
Yeah.
Right. So this is, if we were to say, we have never seen or heard, we've never seen a yogi flying, but we have a mental, and this could be either a unmistaken consciousness or a wrong consciousness, but because we've heard of it, we've actually had a sense consciousness hearing the sounds that meant to our mental consciousness that yogis fly. So there's some dependence on hearing for us to have these other types of consciousness. Does that make sense, Sarah, or did I lose you?
You lost me.
Okay.
Not
Let me,
my fault.
no, let me jump ahead to the 7 types of mind for a moment. So direct perceivers are sense consciousnesses and mental consciousness. So the 5 senses plus a mental sense consciousness. So the consciousness, the eye consciousness, the ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, and touch consciousness, and mental consciousness. 6 consciousnesses, direct perception. You got that part, Sarah?
Yeah.
Okay, so those are direct perceivers, and those are and then there's some other direct perceivers, but we'll go into those later. These sense consciousnesses are direct perceivers. And what this was saying was, in some way, inferential cognizers, subsequent cognizers, correct assumptions, consciousnesses to which something appears but is not apprehended, doubt, and wrong cognizers in some way are dependent on sense consciousnesses. And I gave a couple of examples. One example was, I see the smoke and I make the inference, there's a fire there. I better get out of the way. If it's going to become a big forest fire and burn up everything around me and I'll die, I better move, right? But that's inference. That's the second type. But that second type of inference, inferential cognizer, depends on some level, it depends on having a sense consciousness, a direct perception of something. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if you're lost still, Sarah, or is that
No, I'm
helping?
okay. I'm on board.
Okay, cool. Okay, so let's go back. So then we've already talked about this karmic connection between the environment and beings living in them. And that's a way of there being empty of true existence. You know, these are, in my mind, these are all examples of having being empty, that the mind itself is empty of true existence because it depends on something, because it depends on some sense consciousnesses, and sense consciousnesses depends on sense organs. So in any, these are all ways in showing dependence, even to the subtlest levels of the highest yoga tantra, saying that it's an indivisibility of wind and mind, and that subtle mental consciousnesses are inseparable from that subtle wind that goes along with the subtle mind. All right, so even as you go into the subtler and subtler minds, we're still empty of true existence. And this becomes important for Adriana's confusion about how is this still unchangeable and yet it's empty. So this is a really important understanding when we get into the finer points of looking at what emptiness means. It doesn't mean that it's not permanent. There are permanent things that are still empty because they are dependent on things. In this philosophical discussion of emptiness being the emptiness of inherent existence. So the mind is not changing, but it still doesn't have inherent existence without being dependent on something else. Even the subtler mind, the most subtle mind is still dependent on the most subtle wind. Which is its medium. It's like the brain is the grossest mind's medium, and the subtle wind is the finest mind's medium. Okay? The different petri dish in the same location. It's like having 3 petri dishes of such different composition that they fit all in the same space. All right, anyway, form and consciousness are always inseparable, does not mean that if there is consciousness, it must be contingent on sense faculties or states of the brain. This one's a trick to see if you really understood it. Form and consciousness are always inseparable. Does not mean that if there is consciousness, it must be contingent on sense faculties or states of the brain. You know, sometimes I think Buddhism is really trying to stretch our minds, trying to make sure that we don't fall into thinking we know it when we don't. So sometimes it's saying this so that you have an experience of something rather than that you understand it. So when I read this sentence, it made sense to me because I said, oh yeah, form and consciousness are always inseparable. Anytime there's form, it's not inseparable. There's always consciousness. That doesn't mean that they are linked physically. They're not linked physically.
Hi.
Yeah.
So I just have a question. So they're not linked physically, you just said, but so I'm trying to understand this riddle. They're always inseparable, form and consciousness, But is it also, is it this last part of this sentence saying that they're not necessarily dependent on one another?
No, they are always dependent on each other, but
They are
they're
dependent.
not all, but they're not always together.
They're inseparable, but not always together. Is that what it's trying to say? They're
I
inseparable.
think
but not
so.
always-
That's what I think. I think it's worth thinking about. I think it's worth muddling on it. You know, I think it means that there can't be form without consciousness. There can't be consciousness without form of some kind, but that's not true because in the formless realm there can be consciousness without form. So the form can't be without consciousness means that they're inseparable. There's never a form without a consciousness. If there's a rock that doesn't have consciousness itself, it's been developed by karmic connections with consciousness, with minds of that object. The rock has to come in contact with a consciousness, and the kind of mental cause, the root cause, is karmic, and that comes from a mental consciousness.
And think, okay.
It's
Okay.
not direct. It's not like my mental consciousness made the mountain. It's the mountain exists there because in my environment I need a mountain object because of my karma.
So it
And
sounds,
because of our
I'm sorry, go ahead.
and because of our collective karma. Sorry.
Mhm. So now it's sounding to me like form and consciousness are always inseparable, but not necessarily dependent on my sense faculties, on me, on my perception. They just exist, but that not necessarily contingent upon my states of my brain or my sense faculties.
Maybe something like that.
Maybe, I don't know.
We are at the end of our time. I know I've gone over a little bit, but it's been too exciting.
No.
Laura,
Yeah.
any last questions before we go?
Can I just say one more thing? Yes.
You.
Does anybody else have a question? I'm sorry. Somebody else might have a question.
Oh, I just have a comment.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rachel. This is really extensive.
Yes.
One of the things that's helped me, especially on this page for emptiness, is referring to the Heart Sutra as much as possible. Just rereading it. It's more of a poetic explanation that resonates for certain people, and I'm one of those people where I can read that and it's just like absorbing it on another plane, if you will. Although this is very helpful, but just reading the Heart Sutra, I think, is really helpful.
Well, you've just reminded me, Laura, that next week we're supposed to do the ultimate mind, and we've kind of been playing with it here in the conventional mind presentation. So I probably should have left this for next week, but we'll start back up here and we'll catch up with ourselves. We'll have both of those for the contrast next week as well, and we'll go into this a little bit more in terms of the ultimate nature. But the Heart Sutra is definitely something that is intended to happen over time. The way we reflect on it over time makes it so much more rich than I can't imagine reading it once through and putting it aside and never thinking about it again. So
Thank you.
John, let's do our you're welcome. Thank you. And Adriana, you had one more question.
Oh, I don't want to take up any more time, but thank you. I'll be
Why
here.
don't you just wait until the end after the prayers and you can
Sure.
and maybe I can address it over the week. Okay, so let's do our prayers. I'll stop sharing. Thank you. And if you have your mic on, maybe mute it just so that it doesn't become a cacophony for the recording. So the dedication prayer. So remembering that we intended for this to be as vast and profound as possible so that our minds are trained to become Buddhas. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Venerable one, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land. We make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. All right, ladies and gentlemen, be well and go easy. And we'll see you next week, I hope, and continue our discussion and see where we can get to in this vast arena that is the mind. And if you want to, Adriana, go ahead and stay on after, and maybe John, you can even leave if you need to.